Nearly 25 years ago, some friends and I gathered in an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for a New Year's Eve party. And at some point in the evening, we were playing board games. And it was one of those games that sort of invited you to answer questions that were, they either posed a kind of an ethical dilemma or invited you to reveal something about yourself. And I've forgotten all of the questions except for one, which read, what is the first thing you see, what is the first thing you think of when you see... Okay, now hold that thought. For those who can't read the sign, it says yes, all caps, exclamation point. And it's like no ordinary yes. It's emphatic. It's celebratory. It's the I'm all in. Yes! And I loved this question when it came around that night. So as we were walking out the door to head out to some festivities, I grabbed a matchbook and I wrote, all capitals, yes, exclamation point on the inside cover. And all night, we just walked up to people and asked them, what is the first thing you think of when you see yes? And it was just a series of wonderful and candid answers from people who were confronted by absolute affirmation. Hearing the yes people were living with as we moved into the new year was inspiring to me and my companions. We moved from yes to yes to yes, each answer different, really so different from the last, but authentic in its own way. Some were hilarious. There was the woman who just laughed and laughed and laughed when we held it up, and we suspected something intimate. Some were tender, like the man who was playing pool, he was handsome and fit with matching chains on his neck and wrist, who solemnly looked up and just said, "My wife," before leaning over and sinking the shot. Yeah, we all went, oh, good answer. That evening has stayed with me for nearly half my life because it's how I want to live. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be an affirmation. It's equally important to be clear on what we're saying no to. We can't be a yes to everything. But we have to be a yes to something, both individually and as a community. What is the yes living in our hearts right now? What are we, individually and as a church, moving towards? Now, we may not know, right? Not everyone on that New Year's Eve jaunt had an answer. Some stared back with a solemn, blank expression, like they were sort of caught in a glitch. And I didn't judge these people because, there have been times in my life where I wasn't sure if anything was particularly motivating. I would get up and go to work, not because I felt inspired, because what else was I going to do? Routine happens. Typically, when we've lived for a goal instead of a vision, we have this moment where we achieve a goal. We've won that finite game. And it can often feel less exciting than you imagined, because what was exciting was the pursuit. Settling into a pattern after that can feel comfortable. I know this is good because this is how we do things, but it's not particularly motivating. Living with a vision of something that's within easy reach of our comfort zone is not big enough. If we want to be excited and motivated, if we want to live with yes, then the vision needs to be an adventure. In every adventure story, the hero must carry a bag of resources to help them along the journey. For some, it's a lightsaber. For some, it's a bow. For others, it's a set of teachings. These resources don't always have to be objects. And in our case, as people walking a spiritual journey, I imagine us packing our bag for this journey that we're on with a set of virtues or dispositions that can serve like a compass. We may not be sure, we may not know where we're heading, but it's okay, right? That's actually okay. It's good to be humble when you're walking out the door onto a journey. No one really knows what the future holds. But these virtues can help us correct our course when we get lost. So today is the first in a series of sermons exploring 5 virtues that I think are worth adding to our bag as a community that will be needed somewhere along our journey. They are willingness, gratitude, generosity, agency, and hope. Now, you may have other virtues that you'd like to add, and I actually am really open and excited to learn what those are. We're not limited to these 5. The bag has more room. But working with these 5 should allow us to navigate the journey that's ahead of us. Now, some of you may be saying, I don't really want to go on an adventure. I like the way things are. And I know it's little comfort, but the truth is you're actually already on it, right? The adventure began when Reverend Kate resigned. Something happened that disrupted what was, and all of a sudden you were plummeted into this, okay, what now, right? And that's how it works, both in life and in the fantasies that we read or watch, right? The hero finds themselves confronted by an event that turns life upside down, and things are just not going to be the way they were. It's a call to adventure, and it's essential to every story. Otherwise, Frodo stays on the Shire. Luke Skywalker stays on Tatooine. Helen Keller never learns to communicate. Harriet Tubman stays on the plantation. Jesus remains a carpenter. The Buddha never leaves his kingdom. You are the hero of this journey. You are the hero of this journey, and you're wrestling with a question. And I hope that question is something that's more valuable than, how do we keep things just as they are? Right? It's not a very aspirational question. Some stories are more compelling than others, and that's because the question that they're asking is bigger. It's more meaningful, it's more exciting. There's more yes to it. So something like, how do we bring solace and companionship and liberation for the people of Alexandria, for the people in Hybla Valley? How are we, as a church, going to impact the 100,000 people who are within a couple of zip codes from us in a way that will change their lives? That's a pretty big yes. It's a much more interesting question than, how are we going to pay for Holland Hall? Which is a terrible question. It's very defeating. It's like, oh, I don't know. It's endless. That thing is falling apart. It's not very exciting or motivating. It's maybe necessary for our bigger vision, but the bigger vision is the one that will carry us. But ultimately, it's not up to me to determine or discern what the question is that compels this community. You are the hero. You are the hero. So it's up to you to discern that question. Every story has a mentor that guides them. So Luke Skywalker had Obi-Wan Kenobi, a pretty good mentor. Edward Norton in the Fight Club had Tyler Durden. Charlie Sheen in Wall Street had Gordon Gekko. Not so good mentors, right? You hired me, and perhaps in a few years you'll find out whether it's good or bad. If not, you blame Evan. I'm just kidding. But the mentor actually never determines the question the hero was wrestling with. not in the quality, and not in the magnitude. The mentor cannot compel the hero in any way, and in no small part because the mentor never finishes the journey with the hero. There will be a point when I leave, you will still be here. Richard has probably seen like a dozen ministers by now. We leave. You stay. So our term here, our time is here to almost like cheer you on. Say, you can do this. This is your journey. Ultimately, the hero must go into the cave and find out what is waiting for them. Right? It's treasure or it's failure. And what determines that is the quality of your yes. That will determine the difference. In every movie or book we watch, the hero struggles truly to say yes to their new reality. It's a trope, right? Something happens and they're like, no, I don't want to do that. And things just don't work the way they used to. They really want things to stay the way they are because they know the system. But ultimately, they have to consent. And consent is not often spoken of in the spiritual realm, right? There must be willingness in the hero if they are going to become something larger, more expansive, more open to risk. There must be a moment when they say yes, or there is no story, or it's just really boring because the protagonist just stays the same and they don't become a hero. And Katniss does not raise her hand and offer herself in tribute, but instead allows her sister to be taken in tribute. That's a bad story, if you know the Hunger Games. Someone does. You must say yes, or there's no adventure. There's a poem by Denise Levertov called Annunciation that describes the moment when the angel Gabriel visited Mary, the mother of Jesus. And regardless of whether you think of this story as factual or fiction, it doesn't matter. It's one of the greatest hero stories. And I'm going to read you this poem, but I'd invite you to close your eyes and allow your imagination to fill in the details. It begins, we know the scene, the room, variously furnished, almost always a lectern, a book, always a tall lily. Arrived on solemn grandeur of great wings, the angelic ambassador, standing or hovering, whom she acknowledges, a guest. But we are told of meek obedience. No one mentions courage. The engendering spirit did not enter her without consent. God waited. She was free to accept or to refuse, choice integral to humanness. Aren't there annunciations of one sort or another in most lives? Some unwillingly undertake great destinies and act them in sullen pride, uncomprehending. More often, those moments where roads of light and storm open from darkness in a man or woman are turned away from in dread, in a wave of weakness, in despair, and with relief. Ordinary lives continue. God does not smite them, but the gates close, the pathways vanish. She had been a child who played, ate, slept like any other child, but unlike others, wept only for pity, laughed only in joy, not triumph, compassion and intelligence fused in her, indivisible. Called to a destiny more momentous than any in all of time, she did not quail, only asked a simple, how can this be? and gravely, courteously, took to heart the angel's reply, the astounding ministry she was offered, to bear in her womb infinite weight and light, to carry in hidden finite inwardness 9 months of eternity, to contain in slender vase of being the sum of power, in narrow flesh the sum of light, to bring to birth, to push out into air a man-child needing, like any other, milk and love, but who was God. This was the moment no one speaks of, when she could still refuse, a breath unbreathed, spirit suspended, waiting. She did not cry, "I cannot, I am not worthy, nor I have not the strength." She did not submit with gritted teeth, raging, coerced. Bravest of all humans, consent illumined her. The room filled with its light, the lily glowed on, the iridescent wings. Consent, courage unparalleled, opened her utterly. You may open your eyes. I remember where I was when my spiritual director read to me this poem. I leaned into the phone as she asked, "And how many people do you think Gabriel visited before Mary said yes?" Honestly, the idea had never crossed my mind. The story of Mary for me always held the quality of predetermination, like she was destined for this particular role. It never dawned on me that there might have been others invited into the sacred relationship, others who, for whatever reason, said no. Of course, my spiritual director was not talking about Mary. She was asking about my sense of call and what would happen if I said no. Every relationship, if it is real, is grounded in consent. This is the heart of Levertov's poem. Mary was called by angels for a sacred responsibility. She defied convention. She endured the withering looks of those who did not approve of her past. She traveled so far, her body aching to bring the child into the world, her body aching to fulfill her sacred responsibility, the charge given to her by angels to grow God in her womb. I've always understood this as leading to an inevitable outcome. Of course Mary was going to say yes, but was that true? As someone who does not believe in fate, as someone who believes we must have free will in our spiritual lives if they are to have meaning, it seems that people must not only have the option to ignore their sacred calling, but often do. For me, the most important stanza, perhaps even the poem's point, is not about Mary at all. More often, those moments when roads of light and storm open from darkness in a man or woman are turned away from in dread, in a wave of weakness, in despair, and with relief. Ordinary lives continue. God does not smite them, but the gates close, the pathway vanishes. We must have the opportunity to say no if there is any meaning to saying yes. The sacred bond can never be severed. The longing, regardless of our willingness to follow the call, never gives up on us. But the question invites us into a concerning space. If the call is persistent, and if people are constantly ignoring their call, saying no to it, what are the consequences of such an action? Even non-action is an action. Right? It's just the worst kind of action. Feels like a less like a missed opportunity and more like a living in a sense of denial of purpose, a form of self-negation. If we are saying no to our call, Does this account for some of the suffering we see in people? Is it the source of the suffering we see in the world? Look, I'm the worst at this. No, I'm not the worst. That's like too much, right? I'm like mediocre at this. I've resisted my call a lot. There have been times when I have sabotaged my prayer practice and my career and all sorts of things because I didn't want to listen to what the divine was telling me. I sort of had that moment like, if I just don't sit and listen, maybe it'll go away. But it never does. We did this new member class yesterday, and I was like, I've quit the ministry, I think, like 5 times. It's crazy. But I have one calling I keep coming back to. I think because it scares me. What does it mean to be in relationship? That's tough. My personal story looks a lot more like Jonah than Mary. There's a lot of running, punctuated by a few moments of like, okay, I'll stop running and I'll do it, only to be followed by like more running. And as much as it may seem like I've given my life over to the spiritual relationship from the outside, because maybe I'm standing here, I assure you that it has not been smooth. And I admire those who just seem to hear the voice and push through their fears and say yes to the call. So if it's not easy for you, we're pals on the journey, because it's not easy for me either. And I don't necessarily see this as a failure or a flaw, but I do notice when I suffer. I suffer when I avoid the sacred conversation. So it's important for me to stay connected to people who are also trying, like you, who are also trying to stay connected, to hold precious their spiritual journey and practice. I get a lot of inspiration from that song that we sing. It's Come, Come, Whoever You Are. It comes from a poem by Rumi. When we look to it, we look to Rumi for inspiration on the spiritual life, but I also look to him for empathy, right? When he writes, come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times. Come, yet again come. In his voice, in his poetry, in his prayer, I hear not only companionship for those of us who want to hear our call, who want to say yes, who want to live with the sacred relationship, but also compassion for those of us who struggle. And here I make a leap. It's a projection, right? I say that for Rumi to be able to write these words, he must have known struggle also. This is encouragement grounded in empathy, an invitation to join the dance again. You pick up where you left off. You hold the hand of fellow pilgrims as you step forward once again, once more, again, once more into the great mystery of longing. In our faith, we say that revelation is continuous. Right? We are part of a mystic tradition that understands the world is not profane. Nothing is merely natural. All of it is sacred. Everything is the incarnation. It's not just a single person. Everything is the incarnation. And just as we are part of God, and just as God is within us, so is the Divine Mother. Each of us is also Mary. Within each of us lives the warm darkness of the sacred womb out of which the divine will be born. I don't have a physical womb, the kind that gives birth to human beings. I do have a spiritual womb, and I have been called by angels to fulfill a sacred responsibility to give birth to God. Each of you has a spiritual womb. Each of you has been called by angels to fulfill a sacred responsibility to give birth to God, however that looks for you. You are part of a mystic tradition that lives with the incarnation not as a historic event, but one that is birthed over and over and over again, because you bring God into being so that we might fall in love with it time after time after time. Revelation is continuous. That's what it means to give your consent, to become the womb for the divine. You are the hero of this adventure. I am a companion for a short time. There was an inciting incident. Kate resigned. I'm sorry, you're on the adventure now. The question is, what question are you going to let live in your heart? Is it how do we stay the same? Or is it how do we become the womb for God? Two very different questions. How many people did Gabriel visit before Mary said yes? How many people turned away in dread, in a wave of weakness, in despair and relief? I don't fault any of them. Childbirth is not easy. Your body will ache. You will be sore. There will be times when you feel alone and afraid. But if you have the ability to see, you will recognize the incarnation all around you. If you have the ability to hear, you can find comfort in the groans of all creation as we give birth to God together. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times. Come, yet again, come.